Have you ever received a letter or message from a parent that left you spinning? Something that felt manipulative, guilt-provoking, or fake concerned? If you have, you're not alone. Hey guys, it's Elena, and today I'm sharing something deeply personal. The letter I wrote to my covertly narcissistic mother back in December of 2001. Her two letters to me, which I covered in parts 1 and 2 of the series, were full of gaslighting, revisionism, and emotional bait. This was my response, a firm, final boundary with no daylight or room for confusion. Now, before we get into it, here's the backstory that made this letter necessary. In 1995, 30 years ago, I went no contact with my parents. By that point, I'd survived more abuse than anyone should have to endure. The final straw came when I discovered what my father had really been doing behind the scenes of his photography business. A few months earlier, he'd asked my husband and I to help him run it, promising that everything would be family friendly since we didn't want to be involved with anything our baby son couldn't be around. But one day, he asked me to pick up some photos from his studio for him. When I went there, his business partner looked uneasy, called my father for permission, then handed me a barely sealed envelope and said quietly, "He told me not to let you see these." When we got to our car, we opened the envelope and found explicit photos my father had taken of people, including some family friends, having sex with people who weren't their partners. Some had even been guests at our wedding. That moment shattered any illusion of integrity. So we drove to my parents' house, dropped off the photos, told my father we were done, and walked out. Later that day, I called my mother, hoping she'd finally take a stand after having seen the photos. Instead, she excused it, saying one man's girlfriend had been out of the country during his photo shoot, as if that somehow made it okay. Then she said, and I quote, "He lets me do my witness thing, so I let him do his thing." By witness thing, she meant being a Jehovah's Witness. By his thing, she meant my father's pornographic photography. In that instant, the story I'd believed for so long, with my mother as the martyr, collapsed, and the bridge burned itself. She wasn't trapped, she was complicit. And I realized something truly transformative. You can either spend your life trying to fix what others are happy to leave broken, or you can choose freedom and walk away for good. I told my mother she and my father were sick, that I wanted no part of it, that I wouldn't raise my son around them, that I'd be mailing their house key back the next day, and that our contact was over. But as many of you know, narcissistic parents rarely let you have the last word, and my mother was no exception, hence her two letters to me. With that being said, let's dive into the response that I wrote to my mother 24 years ago this December. Once again, I've redacted names to keep the focus on the content. It begins with, "As requested, my friend passed along the letter that you wrote for me. I felt it only right to respond so as to leave no confusion regarding my position. I cannot say that I was surprised by the contents of your letter. This was simply a continuation of what I have come to expect. Therefore, it, along with our conversation earlier this month, only served to clarify my feelings and reconfirm the reasons behind the decisions that I have made. It seemed that you had difficulty understanding why I have no interest in pursuing a relationship with you or anyone in your family. To restate what I originally said over 6 years ago, I have no desire to associate my children with the type of people that exist in your world. Unfortunately, it took me 25 years to fully comprehend the damage that continued association with you, my father, and the rest of your family could cause. Fortunately, this realization struck me before my children could be exposed to such unhealthy associations." In this opening section, I set the tone. Calm, factual, and fully in control. Even though my mother used someone else to deliver her letter, I made it clear I'd respond on my own terms. That's critical because narcissistic parents often use intermediaries to sidestep your boundaries. A single, direct, emotion-free response shuts that tactic down. When I said I wasn't surprised by what she wrote, it wasn't sarcasm, it was awareness. Once you see the pattern, their guilt trips and revisionism stop being confusing. They simply confirm why your boundary exists and is necessary. I restated my position not to convince her, but to close the loop. Narcissistic parents thrive on ambiguity. They twist any gray area into an opening, so I made sure there was none. And I was clear. My decision was not retaliation, it was protection. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was removing myself and my children from a cycle that would never change. And finally, I acknowledged the time it took to see it. 25 years. That's the truth for so many of us. Clarity takes time. But once you see it, you can stop the cycle for good. That's the power of awareness. In the next section, I shift from boundary setting into moral clarity, drawing a firm line between excuse-making and accountability. It reads, "That said, I would like to address issues raised in your letter. We are all dealt a different set of cards in life. Some are good and others bad. The test is how we respond to the hand we are dealt. An individual can choose to use difficult situations as an excuse for making bad decisions and mistreating others. Later in life, when confronted with the ramifications of those choices, that same individual can once again use the original hand they were dealt as a crutch to somehow justify or explain away the choices that they made. Alternatively, difficult situations can be employed as a tool to improve life, both for oneself and others." In this section, I shift from setting boundaries to exposing one of the narcissist's favorite tactics, self-victimization. I start with the universal truth. We're all dealt a different set of cards in life. It's disarming because it invites reflection instead of argument. But right after that, I draw a clear line between hardship and harm. Difficult circumstances explain pain, but they don't excuse cruelty. When I talk about an individual using their hand in life as an excuse for mistreating others, I'm exposing the pattern so many of us have lived through, where a parent claims trauma as a permanent hall pass for abuse. Narcissistic parents often recycle old wounds to justify the way they treat their children. I wanted to make it clear that this isn't accountability, it's avoidance. And then I pivot. I contrast that behavior with the truth of healing, that pain can be used as a tool for growth, not as a weapon. This is where we reclaim our power. We can't change the hand we were dealt, but we can choose how to play it. And that choice defines everything. Next, I strip away the illusion completely and confront the generational dysfunction head on, directly addressing the "I was only fulfilling my mother's dying wish" excuse that was the crux of my mother's first letter. You mention your mother and her wishes for you to keep the family together. Do you honestly think her intentions were that her children and grandchildren would be raised in an abusive, toxic environment simply for the sake of keeping the family together? Would she be proud of the fact that such an environment produced a child molester who raped two of her grandchildren while they were under your watch? Would she be proud of the fact that you, her oldest child, tolerated and thus condoned the presence of pornographic materials in your household, which contributed heavily to this environment and the subsequent rape of your children? For the sake of keeping the family together, would your mother be proud of the fact that you allowed yourself, your brothers, and your children to suffer continued physical and mental abuse in your household? In this section, I called out one of the most manipulative tactics narcissistic families use, weaponizing family unity. When a parent or relative says, "keep the family together," what they really mean is stay silent, don't rock the boat, protect the image. I wasn't willing to do that anymore. When I asked, "Do you honestly think grandma's wish was for her children and grandchildren to live in abuse?" I was exposing the hypocrisy that keeps so many families chained to dysfunction. Narcissistic parents hide behind the illusion of loyalty, but real loyalty never requires you to sacrifice your safety or your soul. I confronted the darkest secrets, the sexual abuse, the pornography, and the silence that enabled it all, because that's what generational trauma looks like when no one speaks up. I wasn't being cruel, I was being honest. Silence doesn't protect families, it protects abusers. Truth-telling, however uncomfortable, is what protects the next generation. When I asked, would she be proud? I wanted to make it impossible for those justifications to stand. Keeping a family together at the cost of its children's safety is not love, it's legacy-level abuse. Breaking that cycle begins the moment you stop protecting the lie. As we move forward, I start dismantling the excuses both of my parents used to justify their behavior, and I define what real accountability requires. Unless your highly selective memory fails you once again, you'll recall that about 10 years ago, you told me that you were glad that we didn't go crazy because of the environment under which we were raised. In addition, you stated that the reason that you tolerated the abuse heaped upon you and the kids by my father was because you didn't want to have to go on welfare to provide for us. My father once tried to explain his mistreatment of his children to me by telling me that in Vietnam the children were armed with grenades and other weapons, so he developed a callous attitude toward children in general, including his own. For years, I tried to reconcile your actions with various justifications and explanations. Many of these are the same excuses that you are now presenting. If these stories were actually accompanied by an admission of culpability and responsibility, they might actually serve as explanations for some of your behavior. However, on their own, as they currently are, they serve as nothing more than part of the litany of sad, sorry excuses that you and other members of your family use to keep yourself in a blissful state of denial regarding the mess created by your actions and reactions. In this section, I tackled something every survivor faces, the endless stream of excuses. Narcissistic parents love to rewrite the past to soften their image, and I called that out for what it is, selective memory. When I reminded my mother of her own words about how toxic our home was, I was holding her accountable to the truth she kept trying to bury. My mother used the prospect of poverty as a shield for allowing abuse, just as my father used his experience in Vietnam to excuse his cruelty. Both were ways of saying, see, this is why I did what I did, without ever saying, and I was wrong. That's the heart of it, the missing piece in every narcissistic family system, accountability. For years, I tried to make sense of it. I tried to believe that maybe their pain explained their behavior. But there's a difference between understanding why someone is broken and accepting what they choose to do with that brokenness. Real explanations come with responsibility, excuses don't. When I called their justifications a litany of sad, sorry excuses, it wasn't cruelty, it was truth. Denial may protect an image, but it destroys reality. And as survivors, we can't heal while holding on to someone else's denial. Naming it is how we finally step out of the fog. In the next section, I expose the system of denial that protected the abuser and hold every participant accountable in clear, factual, irrefutable terms. It reads, to further address issues raised in your letter, at the age of 11, I told you and my father about the fact that your brother raped me on an ongoing basis for 3 years, from the ages of 6 through 8. At the time of this revelation, your brother lived 2 blocks away at his best friend's house on the corner of address redacted. Therefore, it would not have been difficult to locate him immediately if you truly desired to take any action regarding this. In fact, my father immediately asked me if I was sure that I had indeed been raped and if I would be willing to face my uncle in person with my accusations. I responded by telling my father that I would be willing to endure such a confrontation and that if he didn't believe what I was saying, he could ask my friend, who had been taken into a room by my uncle at the age of 7 and forced to watch as he exposed himself to her. My father then told me that I should not hate my uncle for what he had done, and that I had to accept half of the responsibility for what had happened, since I had not come forward sooner. A few days later, as you and I sat alone in the kitchen, I started crying about the whole situation. You then told me to shut up because when you were little, a neighbor boy tried something with you, but you told your mother immediately, unlike me. This response came directly from you, not from any bad advice that you had been given. After that, my uncle actually visited our house a couple of times before we moved to California. Prior to his first visit, I was told to be cordial to him, and so I was. Your statements that the truth came out only long after your uncle was gone, and your dad tried to find out where he was but could not when we finally heard anything he was in California, are blatant lies and a continuation of your litany of excuses, denials, and justifications. For that, you should be ashamed of yourself. In addition, several years later, you willingly sent your daughter, my younger sister, down to California to attend his wedding when she was 15 years old. What kind of parent willingly and knowingly condones sending one of their children to the wedding of their daughter's rapist? To add insult to injury, 2 of your other brothers both took part in the event as members of the rapist's wedding party. I could go on, but once again, you probably wouldn't comprehend or care about the ramifications of your actions. In this section, I spoke the truth my family spent decades trying to bury. I wasn't reliving it. I was exposing how abuse survives when families protect image over integrity. At 11 years old, I told my parents that my uncle had raped me for 3 years. They both had the chance to protect me, and they chose not to. My father questioned whether it even happened and said I had to accept blame for my own rape and be nice to my rapist. My mother told me to shut up. That's what generational denial looks like, when the people who should protect you become the ones who silence you. Narcissistic families love to hide behind lies like, we didn't know or we couldn't find him. But facts matter. They could have found him. They chose not to. Because in families like this, maintaining the facade always outweighs facing the truth. I also called out the continued betrayal. My parents sent my younger sister to the wedding of the man who raped me, while other family members stood beside him as if nothing had happened. That's what happens when denial becomes tradition. Silence doesn't heal. It hands the trauma to the next generation, and the cycle continues. And for anyone who's carried the weight of family secrets, this part of my letter is for you. Speaking the truth, even decades later, is how we reclaim our voices. It's how we stop pretending the harm was smaller than it was and finally begin to heal on our own terms. The letter continues with, In short, my perception has never been clearer and my focus has never been sharper than it is now. I mentioned earlier that you can take situations from your life and use them either as excuses for failure or catalysts for improvement. The scenarios outlined above are but a few of the episodes that I faced while growing up as a member of your household. As you know, there are many more, and I could easily fill several more pages discussing those as well. However, I see no need to do so. What I will say is this. There's an old saying that states, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. Like you, I could make bad decisions, tolerating and participating in the mistreatment of my children, and later blame it all on my childhood or the hand that I was dealt. However, this is not the life that I have chosen for my children or myself. You and my father serve one ongoing purpose in my life. You are the role models that provide me with the fundamental measure of what I do not want to be and will not become. My children are my first priority. My oldest son was a major catalyst in my decision to permanently sever ties with you 6 years ago. I used my upbringing and life experiences to assist me in my continual effort to be an excellent mother. Rather than perpetuate the cycle of abuse, I have ended it. I think before I act and carefully consider how each decision that I make will affect my family. In this part of the letter, I step fully into clarity, the kind that only comes after years of gaslighting and confusion. When I said my perception had never been clearer, I meant the fog had finally lifted. I could see my family's dysfunction for what it was and see myself apart from it. That's what happens when you stop trying to make sense of the senseless. Your focus sharpens and you start trusting your own reality again. I reminded my mother that every painful experience offers a choice to use it as an excuse to repeat harm or as a catalyst for change. She chose the first, I chose the second. That's the difference between staying stuck and breaking free. Awareness begins healing, but choice is what sustains it. I also wanted to show that you don't have to keep replaying your trauma to prove it was real. Survivors often over-explain because we were taught to defend our truth. By saying there's no need to go on, I was reclaiming control. I decide how much of my story gets airtime. That's how survivors regain power, when the pain stops steering the conversation. I made it clear that I was not shaped by my parents. I was defined by how I refused to become them. Long before I married or had children, I'd already recognized the dysfunction and vowed not to repeat it. Motherhood only deepened that resolve. But you don't need children to break the cycle. It begins the moment you choose to protect your peace. Healing isn't pretending the abuse didn't happen, it's deciding it ends with you. When I wrote this letter, my husband and I had 2 sons. A few years later, our third was born. What comes next in the letter is for all 3 of them, a contrast between the chaos I came from and the life I built once I reclaimed my power. It reads, "What are the results of the decisions that I have made thus far? I have 2 beautiful, intelligent sons who are loving, caring individuals and know that they are loved. My oldest tells me, 'I love you, Mom,' at least 10 times a day. They are extremely well-adjusted, well-rounded boys, surrounded by people who care about them, and they know the difference between right and wrong, based largely upon the example provided by Eric and I. My sons have an excellent set of values and are truly good people who feel comfortable telling Eric and I anything and everything. They know that if they ever have a question, problem, or just need to talk, Eric and I are here for them, as parents should be. They feel protected and know that they are the most important people in our lives. At the same time, they have a realistic view of life and know that good and evil exist in the world with a large gray area in between. I have a wonderful, beautiful husband who is my best friend, who loves and respects me more than anyone ever has, and who shows this on a consistent daily basis. In return, I love, respect, and support him on an equal basis. We have a successful, growing business. Yes, you really can make money on the internet without selling sex. And children who are interested in active participants in the business. Over the years, we have had our challenges, including the 4 times that our children were hospitalized. However, these experiences only make our family stronger and never serve as excuses for wrongdoing or justifications after the fact. In this part, I wanted to show what breaking the cycle actually looks like in real life. It wasn't bragging, it was contrast. Dysfunction had been normal in my family of origin, and this was my way of saying, this is what healthy looks like. I asked, what are the results of the decisions I've made? Because peace isn't accidental. It's built, one boundary, one choice at a time. My sons grew up knowing that love isn't earned through fear or obedience. It's shown through consistency, protection, and respect. They know they're safe, seen, and loved, and that changes everything. I also wanted to show that partnership can be equal, respectful, and life-giving. My marriage isn't perfect, no one's is, but it's rooted in mutual honor and balance, not control. That's something I never witnessed growing up, and it's proof that healthy love can be created even when it wasn't modeled. I even added humor when I mentioned our business because laughter is part of healing too, being able to thrive and enjoy life without guilt. And when I said the challenges we face have only made us stronger, I wanted to show that real resilience doesn't come from denial. It comes from integrity. We face what happens, we learn, and we grow without turning pain into a weapon. That's what healthy families do differently. That's what ending the cycle looks like in practice. In the next section, I begin wrapping things up with, I have never claimed to have walked in your shoes, and I have not been quick to judge you for the decisions that you have made. Only God has the ability or responsibility to judge you for your actions. My responsibility is to ensure that my family and I are surrounded by positive forces, people with more positive energy than negative who take responsibility for their actions and are accountable and therefore trustworthy. As I mentioned earlier this month, I was amused to hear that my father says he doesn't have a daughter named Elena and that my name is not to be uttered in your house. Clearly, whatever's left of his conscience must be getting to him, and the mention of my name must remind him of his many shortcomings. To clarify things for you, I do not hate you, my father, or any of your family members. To do so would require more energy than I am willing to invest in your direction. In fact, one thing that has become crystal clear for me is that I do not have feelings for most of you at all, nor any desire to be part of your lives. The only exceptions to this are my little sister, who I feel has a good heart but needs to work out several serious behavioral and moral issues in her life, and Grandpa, who I love dearly. I was very sorry to hear about his battle with leukemia. This part of my letter is where emotional detachment takes center stage. I wasn't writing from anger, I was writing from peace. I began by acknowledging that I hadn't walked in her shoes because accountability isn't condemnation. You can recognize someone's pain without excusing the harm they've caused. When I said only God has the right to judge her, I was stepping off the battlefield completely. Narcissistic parents love to twist boundaries into judgment, as if protecting your peace means you think you're morally superior. It doesn't. It means you finally know where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. I also made it clear that my focus is my own family, the people I've chosen and built my life with. My job is to fill that circle with people who are honest, accountable, and safe to love. That isn't cruelty, it's discernment. When I mentioned my father saying he doesn't have a daughter named Elena, I wasn't hurt, I was amused. Once you see through the performance, their words lose their power. What was meant to erase me only proved that my existence forces them to face what they'd rather ignore. And when I said I don't hate them, that was not softness, it was freedom. Hate can serve a purpose in healing, but if you stay there, it keeps you tethered to the wound. Indifference severs the cord completely. I simply stopped feeling anything toward people who continually chose harm over healing. I ended this section with compassion, acknowledging the few family members who I felt still held goodness or innocence, like my younger sister and grandfather. Because breaking the cycle doesn't mean becoming hardened, it means seeing people for who they are. My letter concludes with, your letter and our conversation earlier this month represented nothing more than a continuation of an ongoing litany of excuses. As usual, you fail to take responsibility for your actions and the consequences that you are now faced with because of them. Perhaps one day you will wake up and realize what a mess you and my father have created with your selfish, willful acts. However, I'm not holding my breath. It is great that you like who you have become and that you feel stronger for the decisions that you have made. Personally, I expect much more out of myself, but that's just me. All that we can hope for is to be truly happy and satisfied with our decisions and the consequences thereof. Therefore, if you and my father are happy with life the way that you have lived it, more power to you. As you stated, no one can change the past. On the contrary, it's what you do with the future that's important. And the first part of moving forward is taking ownership of what you have done and the effect of your choices, both upon yourself and others. 6 years ago, I decided to move on with my life. The past does not haunt me, nor does it cripple me. It is simply the past, and I use experiences from it to provide a better future for my children, my husband, and myself. You are correct in stating that you are neither the best nor worst mother. Never in my life have I expected or sought perfection from you or anyone else. The only thing that I expect from anyone, including myself, is honesty, integrity, accountability, and responsibility. As for forgiveness, how do you forgive someone for something when they have yet to truly accept responsibility for it? I can say that I have chosen not to harbor grudges in my heart, and not to carry around the past like some sort of burden. I don't blame bad circumstances created today on the hand I was dealt yesterday. If that is forgiveness, then consider yourself forgiven. Sincerely yours, Elena. This final section is where closure takes its full form. I begin by naming the pattern. Her letters and our conversation were just more of the same. Excuses, deflection, and denial. By saying that plainly, I broke the illusion that repetition equals progress. Narcissistic parents recycle apologies and explanations to maintain the appearance of change, but at some point you have to call it for what it is: stagnation. When I wrote, "Perhaps one day you'll wake up," I wasn't holding on to hope. I was accepting reality. I'd stopped expecting her to become someone she wasn't, and that acceptance released me from needing closure from the person who caused the pain. I also turned her own phrase back on her: "No one can change the past." She had used it to minimize accountability, but I reframed it to reveal the truth. The past doesn't define you. What you do with it does. Healing requires ownership. When I said 6 years ago I decided to move on, that wasn't metaphor, it was fact. The past no longer haunted me because I'd stopped feeding it. Closure isn't something you're given, it's something you choose to live in. I made it clear that I never expected perfection, only honesty and integrity. And because she refused to offer either, the relationship had nowhere left to go. And when I redefined forgiveness, I stripped it of anything sentimental. Forgiveness isn't pretending it didn't happen or reconciling with someone who hasn't changed. It's releasing the emotional weight, refusing to let the past dictate your present. I can let go of resentment and truly move forward without reopening the door that caused the wound. So when I ended with, "If that is forgiveness, then consider yourself forgiven," it wasn't reconciliation, it was freedom. Forgiveness wasn't something I gave to her, it was something I gave to myself. When I wrote that letter all those years ago, I wasn't just ending a conversation, I was ending a cycle. I didn't need her to understand, agree, or apologize. I just needed to tell the truth and stand in it. That was the moment I stopped waiting for closure and created it for myself. If you're watching this and you've been told you're mean for setting boundaries or selfish for protecting your peace, I want you to know this. Walking away from abuse is not cruelty, it's clarity. It's what happens when you finally realize that, just like the scripture that says faith without works is dead, love in name only isn't really love at all. You don't owe anyone access to you just because you share DNA. You don't have to explain your boundaries to people who are committed to crossing them. You're allowed to choose peace, even if no one understands it but you. And whether you're a parent, a partner, or simply someone rebuilding from what was broken, your healing matters. You can live differently. You can end the cycle. You can build something beautiful from what was meant to destroy you. Thank you for walking through this part of my story with me. If this video spoke to you, I hope you'll like, share, and subscribe so others can find it too. And if you feel moved to, share your thoughts in the comments, not just for me, but for the people who are still searching for the strength to stand where you are right now. Remember, the past can explain what happened, but it doesn't define who you become. You do. As always, I'm Elena, and this is What Was Meant. Take good care and have a great day.